I'm Emily Fetzer, Head of Research and Analysis at Footprint Media. I'm absolutely delighted to be here today to launch the Footprint Sustainability Index 2024 because we've polled the population. We've interviewed the top movers and shakers from hospitality and food service. We've trawled the latest news and research, and we've done it all to bring you the latest and sharpest insight, the hottest trends, and the opportunities to make your business more successful and more sustainable. So what's the format for today? I'm going to take about 25 minutes to take you through the some of the key findings of the report. This is it. And it will be landing in your inboxes around 12:30 today as well. And then we've got a fantastic panel, which we've got for around about 35 minutes, where we're going to go through lots of the topics that we cover in the report with Julia Jones from Nestlé Professional, Claire Atkins-Morris from Sodexo UK and Ireland, and Oliver Rosevear from Fuller's. So we're going to, first off, I'm going to take you through the key sections in the report. So we're going to cover strengthening strategy, culture, and the supply chain, delivering sustainable diets, attracting and retaining customers and clients. That's massively important, of course. Addressing food and packaging waste, saving energy and protecting natural resource sources, and of course, and encouraging creativity, boosting inclusivity, and fostering well-being for your teams. Okay, but first, before we do that, I need to say a couple of quick thank yous. Thank you, as ever, to Nestlé Professional for supporting the index. Without far-sighted companies like Nestlé, we wouldn't be able to do it. And it's wonderful when we get feedback from the industry on how the index does help drive change and help make hospitality and food first more sustainable. So thank you very much to them. Also, thank you to the report team. This report was copywritten by Nick Hughes, so thank you for his amazing words, and Trevor Marshall, who designed it too. And of course to Viper, who is our partner for the consumer insights, which are always so valuable. So thank you very much to everybody. Right, okay, we can get started on the report findings now. So the very first topic is strengthening strategy, culture, and the supply chain. And what's really interesting is that we talked about it in last year's report that, there was a lot of amazing commitments being made in the run up to COP26. But now, as Oliver Rosevear, who we're going to hear from later, said to me, going into 25, 26, we need to be thinking about those transition plans and how people setting out how you're going to do it. So everybody in the industry, what's been fascinating to see is people are really getting under the skin of how they're going to achieve those amazing ambitions. And this has meant that most businesses have realised that obviously the low-hanging fruit of switching to things like renewable energy and swapping to electric vehicles, that's all done. There's this realization that the majority of emissions are coming from the ingredients on the plate. So scope 3 is where it's at. And there's been some really great responses to this. And actually Compass Group was claimed an industry first because they launched their transition plan earlier in the year. And what was really great about this is it was really transparent. It was designed to be comparable, so that, because one of the challenges we have, which we'll touch on again a bit later, is it's really hard to compare apples with apples. So this has been really helpful. And what you can see here in this little graphic is to show how you can see there this real need to focus on scope 3, because despite these massive reductions in scope 1 and 2, because that's not been such a significant reductions in scope 3, the overall emissions reduction has been 9.4, which overall is really good. It's really good on that path, especially when you see there's been business growth. But it just shows how the ingredients do make such a big impact. This is why in the last year and going forward, we're seeing such a big focus on menus and agricultural practices to reduce emissions. So we've got a lot of work on rebalancing away from high carbon ingredients, such as animal proteins, towards more plant-based ingredients. And this is really happening at scale now. So there was lots of talk about doing this, and now it's happening, and it's really exciting to see how menus are being reformulated at scale. We'll hear a bit from Claire at Sodexo later, but they achieved a 37% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions across scopes 1 to 3, with a 36% reduction in scope 3. So that's really interesting, and we'll hear from Claire how they've done some of that. As another example, Compass got in food steps, and they analysed thousands of recipes to identify those that had the biggest impacts. so they could reformulate them. So again, that will be contributing to the figures we saw on the previous slide. Now, I'm really sad that I can't tell you that consumers would choose a dish just because it's lower carbon. But there's likely to be a hangover from some of the research which has shown that people kind of tend to associate healthy and eco with being far too virtuous to be as tasty. But interestingly, still 36% of PR people that we polled said they would choose a lasagna that was billed as being lower carbon than a standard one. But what's really fascinating about this is I can tell you that it doesn't maybe matter that much, because operators are dramatically reducing the emissions by reformulating in so many ways that customers aren't even aware of, and it's making a really massive difference. For a long time, another key element that came through in the report is around the need to look beyond carbon. This is really something that we've talked around for a while, but it's really nice how this is actually becoming a reality within the industry. We've had a lot of attention paid to biodiversity, soil health, water pollution, welfare and farmer livelihoods, and we've got increased reporting requirements coming thick and fast. So we've got the mandatory climate change related disclosures, the gender pay gap, and there is, of course, they are adding a considerable administrative burden. Then we've got the voluntary agreements like the SBTI and Coal to Hold 2030. So these are really important things, this increased reporting regulations and standardization, because they're going to drive consistency, transparency, and accountability. And alongside, and a catalyst that's driving this as well is the EU's Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, with the first reports due in 2025. And alongside this, the UK government is also updating its reporting requirements in line with the International Sustainability Standards Board. And then, of course, on top of that, we've got deforestation regulations driving change, with EUDR coming into effect soon. But this is an area where really more urgent action is necessary, because the target is to be deforestation free, and only 5% of the total volume sourced by 9 retailers currently met this criteria in 2023. So there's a lot, driving action, and there's a lot of action. So that's really exciting. And again, talking about the transition plan from companies, a lot more working towards consistency and comparable ways of measuring, which is really helpful. One of the things that is underpinning a lot of this work is the need to generate accurate, standardized data for carbon emission calculations. And sort of accuracy around data is becoming increasingly more possible, and that's being supported by things like RAP's protocol and Zero Carbon's, the work by people like Zero Carbon Forum. And people from high street brands like Azuri to contract caterers like Sodexo are doing really brilliant things in this space. But one question that keeps on coming up, it's something that we have touched on before, but really it's becoming a very wider topic now, which is how can farmers be supported during this transition to regenerative practices, because it costs them money to improve indicators like soil health, biodiversity and water quality. So we're going to touch on this about in the panel discussion, but when 50% of GDP depends on the services that nature provides, and that's not factored into market prices, we've got to look at how we can make it work financially for producers. The next topic, interestingly, with the index, it's always hard to divide things into topics, but this year it was even harder because there was so much strategic work on Scope 3. But Scope 3, of course, is a lot about sustainable diet. So we have tried to unpick it and make it sensible. But as I sort of mentioned, there's been a lot of work about re-engineering menus and reducing ingredient impact. And we've had some amazing targets set. So, for example, by 2030, Sodexo's got a plan to have 70% of all main meals to be low carbon, and then working with WWF to define that as 0.9 kilograms of carbon per less per meal, and a third of their centrally designed menu is now plant-based. So there's some really good signs coming through the industry. And one of the other key trends that's helping to do this is the normalization of meat reduction. So although people might not have picked the lower carbon, not that many people picked the lower carbon lasagna, there's still a majority, as you can see from this stat, trying to reduce the amount of meat they eat. So 58%. And that is sort of, quite stable since last year. So it shows that despite other issues like the cost of living crisis, people are still really prioritising this. Now, I mentioned earlier that Compass analysed their recipes. So apparently they analysed about 21,000 recipes, and then they analysed a subset to decide how many had, A, B ratings. And they then, could reformulate the rest to see where they can make the biggest impacts. We've also, within this, we've got to recognise that we're going to be selling meat within hospitality and food service for a long time into the future. So how can we do this in a way that is still less, a lower impact across all environmental and sustainability related criteria? And the conversation around this is becoming increasingly sophisticated. So there's a lovely example from Oaxaca. Some of you may have heard this before, but where they had a beef taco that was made from a bavette, which meant that obviously you needed a very specific cut of beef and therefore a lot of cows to provide that cut. And they changed it to a beef gringa, which could be prepared using any cut. So that dramatically reduces the number of cows needed overall. And so there's very little wasted, and it also means that there's a bit more commercial space to look at better quality. And that kind of brings you into another question of what does better quality mean? And sometimes in the challenges around, welfare and kind of quality, and some research by the WRI, which concluded that sometimes better can have higher impacts per kilo than intensively reared. But what's really interesting to note is some limitations in the data here. So, for example, the calculations didn't factor in the ability of land to sequester carbon, or the benefits of things like regenerative agriculture on key indicators like soil health and biodiversity. And those of you who have seen our report on better chicken in hospitality and field service will also have seen that actually there is some really good evidence that it's possible to have lower environmental impacts and higher welfare without compromising. They don't have to be a trade-off. And we're going to sort of hopefully get to hear from Julia in the panel about their work with farmers and First Milk to see how people are actually working on reducing impacts of particular animal products. It's going to be exciting. So what's happening is that restaurants, because of all these drivers, restaurants are really pumping up the plant power. And our insight survey shows that what do people like? People really like eating plant-based versions of their favorite dishes when they're eating out. So over 50% said that they choose these dishes when they go out. So that seems to be a really good place to start with that reformulation. And lots of people said Wagamama's is moving to 50% of the menu being plant-based. And this kind of menu engineering is tracking so much trends. So in the report, there was another stat that we found that 12% of our survey said that they define themselves as flexitarian. So a diet where you sort of eat mostly plants and less animal proteins. And this type of stuff is happening across menus. You can see this stat where meat is reducing across all spaces. Alongside this, although meat is reducing, there's also been a bit of a shift from processed meat replacement products to more plants and better meat. So sort of more of a rebalancing. And that's partly because there's been a lot of discussion around ultra processed foods. And 70% of people that we surveyed said they were worried about the high health impacts of highly processed plant products. But of course, there's a massive amount of space left for competent products like blended burgers. And there was, a great, some quotes in the report where people were talking about, it's not about going vegetarian or vegan, but about having a balanced diet that gradually increases the amount of plants and plant protein. So it's interesting to see how this is happening across society. One other key part of sustainable diets is the need to support and communicate regenerative practices. So, like we said about there's the whole finance piece, but you look at the way that some people are managing to make massive reductions. So if you look at Azuri Group, they have committed to selling wild farm flour for their pizza dough at Ask Italian. There was a bit of a cost implication, but this reduced the carbon by 50%. So people are really looking at their core ingredients and how to just, not just always changing, animal for plant, but also how to improve those core ingredients they have. We've also got people introducing things like net zero pipelines. I think Compass has got one of these where they help buyers to widen the economic analysis when comparing products so they can evaluate carbon as well as cost and to factor in, and in future they'll factor in other stuff. Unified standards. I mean, there's a lot of confusion around regenerative agriculture or regenerative practices. So there is a bit of a challenge in communicating that and also being clear about making sure people are, things that actually do what people expect them to. But we can hear an example from Fuller's, from Oliver Fuller's later, because they've started to source beef from a grassroots farming collective to kind of really improve the impacts of their beef. Another key point for people in hospitality and food service is, of course, attracting and retaining customers and clients, because without them, we would have no business. So what are some of the key trends and insights in this area? So carbon labelling is, again, underpinning some of the things that we've talked about. It's really, it's creating a bit of a revolution out there. When we asked consumers would they choose, a venue that displayed a commitment to reducing CO2 or one that didn't, we had a big increase again from last year, with 44% said they would. So it is resonating with consumers. But interestingly, and they're becoming really standard, from Wimbledon to Just Eat, consumers can do it. And lots of people from Aramark to many other organizations that we spoke to said that labeling dishes was really helpful for consumers. But interestingly, it's most powerful is how it's driving strategy and change internally. Julianne from the SRA noted that almost all operators over a certain size are getting on board. And they're looking at things not just carbon, but things like B Corp and other certification. And also within the supply chain, you've got people like Cisco and Bidfood, doing things to make it easier for people to identify, products that are working to reduce. So, for example, Cisco is working with Nutritics, who make carbon measurement and labeling tools available to customers via their subsidiary Break, so that people can really look at those different ingredients and begin to get a sense of, if I choose this flour over that flour. And so people are beginning, and then the carbon footprinting software is allowing those granular changes to be tracked, which is really exciting. What do customers want? Well, basically, we asked them, and it's gone up quite a big jump again. So obviously, the cost of living is maybe easing from people's concerns, and we had 33%, so nearly a third said they'd choose a place to eat because of its ethics. So the key message that we get is that people want to be treated, but they also expect you to do the right thing. So restaurants are really trying to nudge customers to make the environmental choices. So Andrea Oxo Tower was telling me how they've moved to sort of help nudge customers towards more sustainable choices. They've moved from a traditional menu to more of a sharing style brasserie menu, which has got an increased number of plant-based dishes. And then they can make them really eye-catching and stand out, like this sort of example of a cauliflower dish. And that's really helping to drive those customer choices in a sort of very subtle way and give them that treat feeling. We've got lots of stats in the report to show what customers are saying that they want when they go out to eat. But essentially, nearly a third said they expect restaurants and food service places to be reducing the environmental impact of their food and to be supporting and promoting sustainable diets. Cost is still their most important motivator, but it does show that it's very important to demonstrate you're an authentic and trustworthy brand that's doing things for consumers. How are they finding out about this? It looks like social media is a pretty busy place for people checking on restaurants and venues' eco-credentials, according to the consumers we polled, because almost half of them were using it to check. So making sure that information is being shared so that customers can make choices on the basis of ethics. However, it must be said that it's extremely important as ever, but even more important in 2024 to share those claims really carefully. First of all, it's important to choose badges and marks that have the greatest resonance with your audience and to make sure that the messages are received in a way that resonate. But also the Competitions and Markets Authority and Advertising Standards Authority have really clamped down on green claims, as many of you know. So it's very, very important to make sure that everything is transparent, truthful, and substantiated in a way that fosters trust and promotes genuine efforts in the food service sector. And we're going to hear some examples from that firsthand from Nestlé, and how they've kind of managed to negotiate that. Addressing food and packaging waste is another key section of the report. And really interestingly, people still continue to say, so this has jumped up again from last year, nearly a third again would choose a place to eat because it's tackling food or packaging waste. So these issues are touch points for consumers that they do care about. And but what we really need is we need everyone to go further and faster in tackling food waste and to push mandatory reporting to make it an absolute industry norm. There's been some great work done. And so some lovely examples out there. For example, Winnow shared a lovely campaign, the Green Breakfast campaign that they'd done to minimise buffet waste. And they managed to reduce it by up to 60% just by doing really basic things, because once they could see what was being wasted, things like they could reformulate. So they realised that they just needed to make some smaller pastry and fruit portions because sizes were too large. It was leading to waste. And they could change the menus and remove those pastry items that were less popular. So they managed to make really substantial changes. We obviously want to always start at the top of the waste hierarchy, whether it's food or packaging. But it's really interesting to note that there is a lot of work going on in the redistribution space, and there's a lot of it. You can see some stats here. There's a massive increase in surplus food and 600% increase in surplus food redistribution by HAF's businesses. And that's that's really going to the next level. And it's also being helped by the fact that we've got King's, Charles and Fair Shares, Coronation Food Hubs. We've also noticed in the industry, I was talking to Olio and others, and they are saying that there's a lot more people were quite reticent to talk about their work with food redistribution previously, but now they're becoming much more open about it, which is very exciting. And they're also beginning to embrace hot food redistribution, and they're overcoming the resistance and realizing that there isn't necessarily a food safety issue here. We've had a lot of Olio's got some great documentation on their website, which kind of takes people through and can provide that reassurance. So it's really exciting that that's changing. So packaging, new government, hopefully more action. There's an overview in the report, but essentially the key message is don't let the uncertain legislative action landscape derail packaging plans. Keep going. There is lots to be done, and hopefully some action from a legislative point of view will support that soon. The industry is still having a bit of a dash away from plastic without always thinking deeply about the replacement. So it is important to swap materials with care and to continue to do that. And also there is lots of exciting novel packaging solutions available, and they're providing hope. And some of them are really exciting because they can work within existing systems. So for example, Nopla, which are the Earthshot Prize winners, they have they're really exciting because you can just literally put their film through existing paper mills to coat them with a biodegradable seaweed based film rather than plastic. So you don't need new systems, you don't need the infrastructure. That packaging can still be recycled as paper. So there's lots of great new things happening out there, and it's quite exciting. So there's a partnership with Levy where they're going to migrate 75 million items of food to seaweed based packaging over the next 3 years at places like the Kia Oval, Wimbledon and Tottenham Hotspur. So that's very exciting. Invest in reuse. Many of you may have attended or read the Canna Cup Save the Planet report, but that really stressed that there's been a real shift in the industry. 95% return rates can be achieved in diverse settings, from KFC to Bupa's offices, Goodwoods to festivals, hospitals and cafes. So and people also there's a lot of work being done back of house as well on crates and packaging. Plus, and our research found that 48% of people, so nearly half, want restaurants and takeaways to take responsibility for providing convenient and reusable packaging. So that is also really important. And there's all sorts of other things about water refill stations, and people want support, and there's lots of ways that hospitality can do it. So look into that shift as well. Saving energy and natural resources, that's really key. We're going to prioritise energy efficiency and electrification. We're going to talk about this in a minute. We're going to talk to Ollie about it in the panel, so I won't give too much away now. We also need to recognise biodiversity as an urgent issue. We're exciting about the increasing adoption of science-based targets for nature, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit with Sodexo and Nestlé. But there have been disruptions from drought and failed harvests. 7 out of the 17 regions in the UK are set to experience severe water stress in 2030. So we do also need to look at water scarcity. Take water scarcity. I can't talk seriously. There's a really sort of terrifying WWF report on the high cost of cheap water, which shows that we really need to. There's a persistent neglect of national and global significance of freshwater ecosystems. But there's some great work being done. HAFS businesses are signed up to the Water Roadmap and doing great work on identifying hotspots and doing projects with like RAP and Norfolk Rivers to work with pig and poultry farmers and the agricultural sector to deliver practical on-farm advice. So things are changing. The last section, which is on staff wellbeing, we call it encouraging creativity, boosting inclusivity and fostering wellbeing. And this is really important. Again, a massive chunk of the population, 31%, think doing the right thing is for people and planet is a priority quality and an employer. When we've got a 50% higher vacancies than in pre-pandemic levels, one of the solutions is sustainability because it's a great sell. So you can see here that there's a lot of things that people care about, but doing the right thing is still up there, and it's very, very important to make sure that we are looking after people, and mental health came through really strongly as a key issue. So another thing that people are really looking at now, joined with a wider societal trend, is taking action on neurodiversity. There's a real recognition of the differing needs that people might have, but also the massive value they can bring to organisations. We've also got some more targets to boost women in senior management. So we really kind of, so all these things are interlinked, as always, about using recruitment to boost this representation. There's also a big push to have more Runnymede Trust and Share Action are also doing a big push to get people to voluntarily report on the ethnicity pay gap. Currently, only 18 of the 100 companies do this, but Sodexo and others are doing this voluntarily, so that's really, really good. But ensuring representation at all levels is really important for hospitality and food service. They've got the highest proportion of Black and minority ethnic workers, but it tends to be skewed towards the low paid. So it's really important to look at how people progress and make sure those skills are developed. And there's also some great work about using recruitment to boost representation and also to help wider societal issues and fill those gaps. Again, these sort of virtuous circles, but Westminster Kingsway is working with Catch 22 to guide refugees into work, which is really exciting. So the last one is to talk about investing to attract young people. So there's a massive focus on sustainability. 66% of people that are polled say employers have a responsibility to actively promote sustainability at work, and that's up to 73% for millennials. That's some Compass research, I think. But the thing is that again, you've got to upskill all these people, because like I mentioned earlier, we've got all this increase in legislation and other things. So without getting the skills to people, and that will attract people if you know that you've got the sustainability focus and that they will get to develop this area of their career. It's again a really brilliant way to really get people in and develop them and keep them. Now, I'm really conscious we've got to move on to our panel now, which is very exciting. So we're going to talk about some of this a bit later and some of the great work that the industry is doing to persuade young people into the industry. So without further ado, could I have my lovely, lovely panel of Julia Jones, who's Head of B2B Marketing for Nestlé Professional, Claire Atkins-Morris, who's the Director of Sustainability for Sodexo UK and Ireland, and Oliver Rosevear, the Director of Sustainability for Fuller's. So like I said, we've got about half an hour to go through some topics. What I thought would be great to start with is, Ollie, we were talking in the report about how we really need to think about these transition plans, and you've got these made a commitment to net zero. You've really got to sort of set down how you can do it. How is a business like Fuller's, articulating and implementing an effective transition plan?
Sure. So I guess from our position, it's part of it's around transparency. So actually being really transparent both in and out of the business around what you're doing, but really embedding it in the data. So through our kind of commitment to science-based targets, we've obviously done our footprint across scope 1, 2, and 3. And that's given us some really clear areas of focus and focus of risk as well as a business. And now we're working this year into publishing a transition plan that will clearly lay out exactly how we're going to achieve net zero. As you said in the report, I think there was a big focus around COP26 around people sort of rushing to those commitments around net zero, but now it's very much about what are you going to do to get there. And I'd say for us, our scope 1 and 2 timeline is fairly obvious and fairly clear and fairly advanced. Clearly scope 3 is the more challenging area. It's probably 75% of our total footprint. And certainly, whilst we've got some of the answers, I wouldn't say we've got all of the answers. So, this transition plan will really help us to understand the sort of a clear pathway, but also the cost, both positive and negative, of that transition to net zero as well, and really be able to help us articulate that to both our board, our team members, but also our customers as well.
Amazing, thank you. And I mean, we looked at how ingredients are a really, really key focus of decarbonisation efforts and this really balancing of menus. Claire, we mentioned about some of Sodexo's targets, but before we get into the nitty gritty, like how is this being done at a strategic level? What targets and actions are being implemented to reduce these impacts through menus and the supply agricultural practices?
Yeah, so within Sodexo, 99% of our entire carbon emission sits within scope 3. So it's absolutely apparent that we have to operate very much within the scope 3 space, which is great in so many ways, like loads of opportunities are there. But in addition to the SBTI, which we have short, near and long-term validated, we also have FLAG targets as well, forest land agriculture. So that really helps us to stay very true in terms of where our impact is. And as Ollie said, very data orientated. So knowing where your key impacts are is your primary driver. And I know we'll go on to SBTN later, but some of the work that we've done with our supply chain has been key. So with the supply chain, it's 34% of our scope 3 footprint. So straight away, there's big impact there. We released our net zero supply chain engagement strategy with our supply partners over 2 years ago. We're really clear with those milestones. Again, want to be very transparent, but also being very tonally clear that by 2030, if they weren't able to demonstrate tangible progress, then we would cease continuing to work with them. So that feels quite strong. But we surveyed our supply partners and we're very much like, where are you on this journey? We're surprised about the maturity of our supply partners, particularly the SMEs. So 50% of our spend is with SMEs and those social enterprises. And we've been super impressed with where they've got to. So our next target, our next milestone is for those that have been emission-led, so those that have high impact emissions to our business, which will be primarily food suppliers, primarily meat providers, have to set in science-based targets that will be validated by SBTI by 2025. But we're not just saying you've got to do it, we're also saying how can we help you get there? So we've got a mentoring program in place to guide them through, and that's the only way that you can do it. We have a transition plan. We know the bits, the levers that we need to do. So that's a real key area. But I'll pause because I know there's loads, Amy.
Amazing. And so that brings us on, that element of support, Claire, brings us on to another key point, which is around this point that comes out in the report about providing financial support for producers to drive the shift to regenerative practices. So Julia, do you want to talk a bit about what the work that Nestlé is doing to kind of enable this shift?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing to be really clear is that our expectations have changed and are changing. So we absolutely need to assist and really financially support that transition, because it is a risk to to move to regenerative practices. So we need to really establish those long-term relationships with farmers, which is exactly what we've been doing in Nestlé. So really helping them implement initiatives and build that trust in the long term, so that they know we're here for the long term. To support that transition. So as for instance, on our Nescafé 2030 plan, we've really accelerated our action with a 1 billion Swiss franc investment by 2030. And that, so yeah, some examples really of what that's enabling. So last year, it enables us to provide training on regenerative practices to over 148,000 farmers across 16 countries. We could plant 3 million forest and fruit trees with that to increase the biodiversity. And then in 3 countries, in Cote d'Ivoire, Indonesia and Mexico, we're piloting a program of financial support for the smallholders, so for over 2,800 smallholders. And that then really helps them at the farm level do that transition, and also gives them a higher income. And certainly the farmers say that without the support of companies like Nestlé and others, they couldn't do it. They need that investment. It's crucial for them. Yeah. And for us, of course, it ensures that long-term resilience of the supply chain.
And it's interesting because we do sort of need this fundamental rethink of the way things are costed generally as well alongside that. Moving on to sustainable diets, which, as I said, there's a tremendous amount of crossover this year. But we've been talking about how people are decarbonising their menus as part of their plan to reduce Scope 3. And that stat you gave, Claire, is to 99% is really dramatic. And people obviously are doing this through re-engineering menus to use lower impact ingredients or shifting to more sustainable versions of the same ingredients. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about how Sodexo achieved that 36% in your Scope 3.
Yeah, so sustainable eating strategy, and I think it was quoted, I'm going to quote David Burrows here, who was talking about food waste as one of the low-hanging elements of Scope 3, but take it from Sodexo, we've been on this journey for a long time for food waste, and it's still really apparent that lots of organisations are making commitments, but fundamentally aren't making any real impacts around food waste. So that's been a real lobbying advocacy campaign for us. So we have we committed, and like Julia, put sustainable financing behind our commitment to reduce our impact, so our food waste by 50% by 2025. So we've got one more year to go, and we've used technology deployed across all of our sites, and we currently report around 44% reduction in impact. So we know where we need to be, and certainly the sustainable finance keeps us nice and on the sort of straight and narrow. But that's only one small part. If you think about sustainable eating, you then go back to the products. So it's that responsible sourcing and how and where you get that from. So 71% of our product is British. And that will continue to be reviewed and looked at as we take our consumers on the journey. No, strawberries do not work in this country in December, but it's a piece of work that we're continuing to do. The second thing is around the food in itself. So you talk around sustainable eating, the stats that you shared previously, you are seeing a real shift in consumers within this space. But there's very much like, for us, it's about how we take our people, our chefs, and all the different consumers on that journey with us, and they'll all be at a different place. And I think it's really impactful to see the different elements of levers that you need to pull. So, for example, we did a WWF lever report in partnership with them, sharing with food service organisations the multiple layers that you need to get to a sustainable eating strategy. So a bit of a plug for that, but I'd highly recommend that. Like going back to the red piece, it is really challenging. There is no defined framework within that, but it is certainly something that holistically we need to look at with our farmers, particularly in the UK.
Well, just before we're talking about trends and consumer trends, Julia, what have you noticed at Nestlé? Because we have seen a bit of a cooling off with some of the plant-based replacements. What are you guys seeing at Nestlé in terms of people's interest, and how is the market changing?
Yeah, so I think as you say, yes, there has been some cooling off, but we are still experiencing a steady growth. So around 10%, but it is the same as the growth in the out-of-home market. So yeah, it's not that kind of major hype that it was in the past, but there's definitely still consumer demand. And it's still appealing to that kind of wide base of consumers driven by health, environmental concerns, animal welfare. So, and as you said in the report, people are is a good amount of people choosing to reduce their meat consumption. So that does then open that opportunity still for really delicious plant-based menu items, whether it's meat or other proteins as an alternative, or more veggie-based beans, legumes, etc. And bringing in that real kind of diversity of ingredient, which we all know is ultimately healthier. Clean label, definitely the trend. And technological advantages are really improving that taste, texture, and quality. But like you were saying, meat, it's not demonizing meat. Meat, better meat, and lower environmental footprint.
Yeah,
sorry.
On that lower environmental footprint, can you just give us a really brief summary of some of the tangible work you're doing with First Milk to reduce the impacts of that?
Yeah, totally. So with First Milk, so dairy cooperative, we've been working with them a long time, 20 years, and for about the past decade on regenerative practices. So it's about 80 farmers across Cumbria and Ayrshire. As you say, it's about lessening the environmental impact and really protecting the natural resources on the farmer's land. So what we have is a set of compulsory measures, and two of them are related to reducing the agricultural emissions, so increasing the biodiversity and optimizing the carbon storage. And as an example, last week I was actually at one of the farms, Penrith in Penrith in Cumbria, and saw really firsthand. And this was a farmer that had been working on regenerative practices for about 5 years. So what we saw was really thick, rich, green, diverse forage, cloves, plantain, chicory grass, absolutely stunning. And the cows are eating, it was about 50 kilograms of that grass a day, each cow producing around about 600 litres of milk. And with that grass, the soil and its structure are going to be so much healthier and will sink more carbon. Then there's actually some analysis going with agricarbon, to measure those emissions and the sequestration. So it'd be exciting to see what comes out of that. But yeah, that's essentially what we're doing with First Milk. So it's great stuff.
Really great work. And Oliver, I know that you are doing your work with grassroots, but regenerative agriculture is a really complex kind of term with lots of different definitions, and it hasn't sort of yet got a unified sort of set of definitions that everybody is using. So, how is Fuller set a definition, and how are you communicating this work to consumers? Because it's quite a complicated set of benefits. So, kind of pithily.
Yeah, definitely. I think from our perspective, I think very much one of the key things for us was that getting that third-party validation. So rather than Fuller saying, yeah, we're buying from these great regenerative farms, but actually not having the data behind it, really working with third parties. So, for instance, with Grassroots, they use the Farm Carbon Toolkit to actually do that measurement and look across the various kind of metrics around regenerative farming. And yeah, I'd sort of echo what Julie's just said in terms of actually when we go on farm and we see exactly what's happening on that farm in terms of soil quality, actually in terms of the health of the animals as well, and actually the robustness to those animals. You can see the quality that comes through, and actually that really shows up with the products that we're selling in site. So, where we've introduced the Grassroots beef into our business, the feedback from customers has been phenomenal actually in terms of much better quality, much more, much better flavour actually, interestingly, that's really coming through. So there's a real customer benefit to this, as well as there being a huge sustainable benefit, which is always that kind of sweet spot you want to meet when you're trying to bring these kind of things into the business. So I think that's been key.
That brings us on to sort of the attaching and retaining customers and clients section, and understanding those choice motivators, like we sort of said about 44% choosing a venue with the signage that says they're reducing carbon. But it's particularly the contract caterers have done a lot of work to reduce the carbon impacts, but it's particularly hard for people on the high street who want a treat, they want that treat occasion. They don't want to be made to feel guilty. So, how are operators juggling the need for treat whilst tackling the climate crisis?
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question. I think the challenge is that people are coming out to indulge when they're coming out for an evening out, and they want to be able to enjoy what they want to enjoy. So I think more than ever, it becomes the responsibility of the operator to do that reduction. So, we are working around dish optimization. So looking at how we reduce food waste within the production of the dish. We're looking at the sourcing. So that's why we've gone down the route of using grassroots beef across our business to make sure, it's a 52% reduction in carbon emissions versus normal UK beef, which is pretty dramatic. And that's not even taken into question. So, it feels like the right route's taken. Again, we're looking across the various different meat categories as well to do that. But also really focusing on flavour and quality. So actually what we're seeing is a bit of a trend away from talking about vegetarian dishes or vegan dishes and actually just about the dishes themselves, really focusing the customer on what great food they're going to enjoy as opposed to making a choice on plant, because we're almost sort of doing the work for them, if that makes sense, rather than kind of them feeling like they're having to maybe not have what they want as an experience when they're out. So I think that's definitely where the trends are going in terms of necessarily sort of, I guess, preaching about sustainability. It's more about taking them on a journey, but actually making them feel like it's their choice.
And Julia, that kind of brings us on to, the report really highlights the need to share green claims carefully. And so that communication piece is a very careful negotiation to be completely accurate whilst trying to find language and ways to communicate that isn't too detailed and laborious for the consumer to understand. So, I know that you've got some great systems within Nestlé. Can you explain how you're approaching that to make sure you can communicate effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are very lucky that a process was implemented to enable us to communicate, but and accurately and reduce that greenwash risk. So essentially, what was done was a team of experts, the regulatory sustainability experts, formed a sustainability claims committee, we call it. So it checks marketing activity against 4 checkpoints. So 1, the claim doesn't overstate anything. 2, it's not focused on an impact that's small compared to the sort of related activity. 3, it's not misleading consumers, and 4, it's not unsubstantiated. So essentially what happens is our brand managers will bring a messaging that they want to talk about on their brand to the committee. Does it pass those 4 checkpoints? If not, the committee will work with them collaboratively to really craft something that's both compelling and compliant and make sure it passes those checkpoints. So then we can, without misleading, in that accurate way, drive that behaviour change that we need. So that's what we're doing. So very lucky with this process.
Yeah, well, it sounds really good. It's good to have it set out. Moving on to addressing food and packaging waste, we obviously, there was Claire, when we spoke for our research for the report, you were voicing the thoughts of many, which is around the need for mandatory reporting. Why do you think that's important? How is that going to help drive wider change? You talked about the amazing work you guys have already done, but about the wider uptake.
Well, I suppose it goes back to the data. So knowing, I think when you talk to chefs go, we don't produce any waste, like it's an age old, but then when you actually challenge it, that they fundamentally do. And the data shows, so whilst food waste may seem a small element of a wider sustainable eating strategy, it's paid real dividends in terms of reducing our emissions. So we've actually been able to report back going, we've been surprised by how big an impact from an emissions perspective putting this lever in. It came about through the fact that we've got some great voluntary commitments out there, so RAP and the coal tar commitment. But fundamentally, when you talk to individuals, I think there's two points here. Firstly, that people aren't really tracking food waste, and therefore it goes back to action rather than ambition. It's calling those organisations out to say, you've benefited from these claims, but actually show me what action you've made against them. And also, it's a real scandal So we talk around sustainable eating and food systems and the pressure that they're currently going to be on, and food insecurity and food poverty that takes place within the UK, but we're still then wasting food. It just seems a real opportunity to really showcase actually how important it is to focus on it, but it's not very sexy and it's not very marketable. So it does need people that sit behind it, really pushing it. And it got to the point where, we'd spoken to lots of stakeholders, lots of government ministers say, we think this is just the best way to really drive good, transparent reporting and really call out food waste is significant.
No, I completely agree. Food waste, none of it should be wasted. We all should go to the top of the hierarchy in all instances. Just kind of talking about, so obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around packaging. So I thought rather than digging too much into that, we could go to talk about a bit about reuse, which is becoming increasingly adopted. Ollie, I know you've got a great example of how because obviously it's harder on the high street where you haven't got closed environments. So I know that you've got a great example from the Cabbage Patch and other venues in your business. You could share what the work you've been doing there.
Sure, absolutely. So the Cabbage Patch is one of our big rugby pubs. So it's right by Twickenham. If anyone doesn't know it, and probably on a genuine match day, we serve around 10,000 pints before the match. So pretty intense as a business. A good few years ago, for security reasons, we had to obviously move away from glassware into plasticware, which was quite wasteful and obviously using a lot of single-use plastic. So we started working with a business called Reuse, previously known as Green Goblet, to essentially use reusable glasses instead. So the glasses are dropped in on a pallet in the morning. The team then use them throughout the day. They're returned back into bins, and then we collect them and they're sent off for washing off-site, so they can do 10,000 cuts in less than an hour, and then obviously returned on a regular basis. And actually, it's been a really positive move, both for the team, because obviously got a huge reduction in waste after the match, which is great. From a customer perspective, they really appreciate it because it's actually a better quality rather than these kind of flimsy single-use plastic cups. And actually, the teams are really proud about it as well, that they're doing the right thing. They're not wasting during those events. So it's been a really nice partnership. And as I say, we started the Cabbage Patch. We've now got it across all of our event pubs. So wherever we've got football matches or rugby matches, we automatically use that system, which has been really effective. And actually, the return rates are very high as well.
That's amazing, and I think what's lovely in both of the examples you've given, you said it's increased customer satisfaction, and it's actually been better overall. And I think that's what's so lovely about sustainable solutions. Once done well, and often when you've got that return on investment, you've got through that period of changing the systems and having to do some investment, and it's really lovely to hear you say that. Just moving on to energy and protecting natural resources, I know Fuller's have done some great work as well around kind of the electrification of your kitchens, and that's really helped contribute to your net zero reduction targets. Could you just give us a bit of an overview of the work that's been going on there and kind of hopefully showcase what can be done?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think from our point of view, we started very much with the behavioural change side of things. Actually, how can we get our teams to do the right thing, particularly in kitchens? The classic thing is the chef walks in the morning and turns everything on. And it's kind of that question of how do you start to prevent that? And part of that can come through behaviour, but actually part of that can come through equipment. So we started looking at three key pieces of equipment. So our induction hobs, our fryers, and our salamander grills, which is the finishing grills. And we actually identified that by moving from typically gas fed to electric fed, we saw a significant improvement in efficiency. So in essence, with an induction pan, it only comes on when you put the pan on, and it's automatic heat. You can heat in really, really quick succession, and then the heat goes off rather than that hob going on constantly throughout the day. So essentially, we've eliminated gas in our kitchens as a result of those changes, and we've also actually seen a reduction in electricity usage, which is was one of the things we didn't expect to see, because you also get a reduction in heat. So from a refrigeration point of view, it works more efficiently, but also from a team's point of view, huge benefit for them in the sense that they're quicker on speed of service, but also it's a nicer environment to work in. So we've already electrified 10% of our estate to date. We're going to get that to 20% this year, and again, the plan is to obviously get our full estate electrified over the next 3 to 5 years. So, very, very clear plans, and actually the paybacks are sub 3 years at the moment. So actually we're seeing, and that's active replacement as well. That's not just, we were going to replace the kitchen anyway. That's where we're actively going out and doing that replacement.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, just quickly, so we have time to cover it. Claire, we talked about the biodiversity crisis and how important, and I know that you and Nestlé are among 17 others who have adopted science-based, doing this pilot on science-based targets for nature. Can you kind of explain to us what it means in practice, just briefly, please?
Yeah, well, nothing around SBTN is brief. Let me just say that one. So those that have gone through SBTI, they would know that there's a lot of data that's needed, a lot of rigor. But what it then gives you is a really clear idea of the pressure that you're putting on multiple points within the ecosystem. So really good understanding. It means that you can take targeted action plans and you can then go through the progress, which is why so many of us are going down that route. But it is important because there are lots of different commitments you can put out there. But it kind of goes back to what Julia was saying about the Sustainable Claims Committee, without knowing fully where your key pressures are, you may be focusing on stuff that actually isn't that materially relevant for you and your organisation. And the knock-on impacts, a lot of this is within our supply chain. So you want to do it in a very targeted, measured way, so then you're not just cascading the expectations down there, because that is not the approach to take either. So yeah, watch this space. I think more organisations will go down the SBTN route.
Brilliant. And that kind of moves us on to the last section, which is around employee health and well-being. And I know that, we have this massive issue, this 15% increase in shortages of vacancies. Julia, I know that there's a lot of work being done to try and get people in and to help upskill people so that they can tackle all these complicated reporting and new ways of working. So can you tell me a bit about what you're doing to try and help bring this, some of the mechanisms about bringing the industry together to recruit and drive change?
Yeah, so what we did, having seen that this is a fundamental issue in the industry and systemic, that we co-founded with Choose Hospitality and Springboard Career Scope, the Choose Hospitality Pledge. So it's about going into schools, inspiring young people to consider a career in hospitality that we all know they're not today. So get to them when they're having their eyes kind of first open to potential career paths. And just in the interest of time, to highlight a great initiative we've done. So we reached out to our kind of partners and customers to see if they wanted to get on board, and in general it was a resounding yes, because it is a common industry challenge. So with Sodexo, we formed a great partnership this year and went into their stadiums together and hosted mass hospitality career workshops, and gave these young people an idea of what a career in hospitality is about, through explaining what the different roles are, the routes into hospitality, and gave them some real kind of taster sessions, get them set up a banqueting table or something like that. So yeah, it was really nice. And then we got young people. We make sure we've got young people in those so that it's really relatable. They can share their experience. So some who have just sort of come into the industry, some who can explain their career path a bit more. So yeah, that's what we've been doing, and it's working well.
That's amazing, and it's wonderful to hear from the industry all the different projects that people are doing, like the one we mentioned about the refugees with Westminster Kingsway. There's all sorts of there's such a wider recognition that there are so many talented pools of people out in society that were being potentially also missed by existing recruitment streams. So that's amazing. I am so sad we have come to the end of our time, but I want to say a massive, massive thank you to Julia Jones, Ollie Rosevere, and oh God, who haven't thanked? I'm going mad. And Claire, sorry, did I not thank you? I'm going mad, sorry. So thank you all so much. You've been amazing, and those really tangible, finite examples are absolutely gold dust. Thank you all for listening. The report will come out. It'll be on the Footprint website from about 12:30, but also the people on our mailing list will get an email to sending it to your inbox. But thank you so much. But the really important thing is a lot of change is happening. We need more. We have to make sure we keep our climate as stable as we can. So please read the report, act on it, and share the insights. And I hope you found today really interesting and insightful. And I really am appreciative to the panel and to all the amazing people that gave their time to be interviewed for the report, and all the consumers who filled in our surveys, and Viper and Nestlé Professional and everyone. So thank you very much. And that's it from me. Goodbye.